An earth-shattering chill froze my body in time. Floating amongst the cornucopia of evolving buildings, I tried to move each individual joint in my body one by one, but no amount of effort could produce a reaction. As my body continued to drift farther away from the woman who was keeping me company in the coffee shop, I couldn't help but feel a sense of serenity in my inability to escape the ice that engulfed me. After what felt like 2 more hours of ungovernable movement, the large buildings that were frequently changing scale and color had turned into the size of ants, and I edged closer and closer to the dark abyss. But just before I was about to fall into that inescapable hole, I jolted and rolled over in my bed. When I came to my senses, I soon realized that my dream had seeped into reality, or rather that reality had created the dream itself. My blanket had been pulled off of my bed by my dog, Robert, and the AC that was blasting from my window had caused whatever realm of sleep I found myself in to reflect my frigidness. "Man, couldn't you just once not be unpredictable and wake up when I want you to?" I said as I sat up to look at my dog's mouth stuffed with fabric. I grabbed the comforter from his possession and slung it over me like I was setting down a picnic blanket at a park. That was a really strange dream I had just then. Who was that girl? Why were we in a coffee shop? And why do buildings and dreams never seem to stop changing? Those being the immediate questions that came to my mind didn't really surprise me, because ever since I was young, I feel like I've had a deep desire for control. My mom used to have this terrible habit of scrubbing the dishes until their protective layering wore down. It's not like we couldn't afford an extra pot or two every month. Both her and my dad had decent jobs, but it bothered me to see, and it was one of those things that I think impacted me more than I'd like to admit. I'd be sitting there, finishing up her bolognese that took her hours to make, and she'd still be in the kitchen, making sure every single speck of dust and grime was removed from the metal. I'd glance over at my dad, and we'd both chuckle with a sort of, "Oh brother, this again, look," and ask her to please sit down. But every time, she'd always say the same thing. If you don't control your environment will control you. I wasn't really sure how that applied to a simple pot, which clearly wasn't going to grow feet and turn into a dictator, but I assume she thought that dirt was something that could get out of control if left unchecked for. Eventually, the chuckle across the table that was reciprocated by my dad turned into a dark frown. Since my mom was so controlling of his actions, she would constantly worry about where he was and what he was doing. She always made sure to have him call her whenever he arrived at his destination and give her every ounce of detail about the event. And when he would leave something out of the explanation by accident, or take a little longer than usual to get back, her brain would default to the worst case scenario, and an argument would break out due to her insecurities. I think that sort of control from another human being would start to wear anyone down. So after 10 years of marriage, my dad finally couldn't take it anymore, and he filed for a divorce. Over time, I've become aware of the traits I adopted from my mother: fear of abandonment, anxiety induced by the uncertainty of the future, and a strong necessity for control. But no matter how hard I try to shake them off and work through them, they always come back in numerous different forms. And while I am glad what happened to me on this fateful day happened, I wish I would have tried finding a therapist on today's sponsor, Betterhelp, before it got as bad as it did. We live in a time where therapy is starting to become much less taboo. I personally have gone to therapy many times in the past, and it has helped me significantly, and BetterHelp is one of those platforms that is really helping promote that. If you guys don't know by now, BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it is 100% online. Their network is massive, and it's ever expanding. They have 30,000 licensed professionals and therapists that will help you with whatever range of issues you are dealing with. Basically, you just answer a few questions on your needs and preferences, and they will match you with a therapist that is in accordance with those needs. Then you can talk to your therapist however is most comfortable to you, whether that be text, chat, phone call, or a video call. And if by chance your therapist is not right for you, you can change your therapist at any time at no additional charge. So I've been working with BetterHelp for several years now, and I have a close relationship with the person who actually set me up with BetterHelp, and she sent me a little testimonial sheet that shows all the past testimonials of you guys who have opted in to make a testimonial and who have actually used BetterHelp for a long time. And seeing that sheet and seeing what has happened, because a lot of you guys have used BetterHelp and gone to online therapy, it's just amazing to see. I love the way that they are expanding options for therapy and the way that it's so flexible and more affordable than in-office therapy. So if you are interested in getting therapy and trying this out for yourself, yourself, you can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Cole. That is betterhelp.com/Cole. After I felt sufficiently heated by my blanket's embrace, I pulled myself out of bed to get ready for the day. There was everything I had lined out the night before I had fallen asleep. Just like how it had always been every day before that. My lemon citrus scented soap on a silver tray, my toothpaste with its fully tightened cap pointed north, my Oral-B electric toothbrush that had looked completely unused and unblemished, and my contact case with no remnants of solution spillage. I made the decision to live alone after I'd moved out of my mom's house at age 20 because the idea of having a roommate who would take half the reins of control over my living area irked me to my core. Of course, this also meant my love life was non-existent too. After all, no girl wants to date a dude who can't even calm down his anxiety when he sees someone put down a glass without a coaster on a wooden table. Today was Sunday, which was my only day off of the week. I always dreaded this day because it was the only time during my week that everything wasn't planned and revolving around my work. As I scrambled through my disorganized mind, each potentiality I passed felt like a checkpoint boost for my anxiety. Well, I guess I could do some stuff for work today, but then I would be working every single day this week and that wouldn't be good for my mental health. I could go to the park and meet up with some friends, but then I might start falling behind with work and increase my chances of getting fired in the future. Or I could just sit around and do nothing, stay inside, and mitigate the risk of any type of mistake. How could I ever know what decision will be the right decision? The thought of being one action away from a completely different life, and potentially a less desirable one, left me paralyzed. The world was my oyster, but all I wanted to do was take the pearl from its mouth and close it shut for good. This continued on for around 30 minutes, which, by the way, was pretty quick when compared to my other uncontrollable anxiety attacks, until my thoughts were shrouded by a large bark. It was time to take Robert for a walk. Robert is the only unpredictable force of nature I've willingly let into my life. I decided to give him a human name to give me the illusion of a more stable sentient being, but that hasn't done much in the long run. A few months ago, my friends convinced me that owning a dog would be a great first step to priming myself to be okay with things outside of my control. But all I've gotten out of it so far is a piss-stained couch covered in fur, sleepless nights, and a few undesirable acne breakouts. Still though, I wasn't just gonna let him wither away in my house. That would make me a dog murderer, which may very well be worse than being a registered sex offender. So every day, I'd take him on a long walk around my neighborhood. However, this walk was different, because it was the walk that would shatter the part of me that had been destroying my life since I was a child. As Robert pulled his leash forward, which left me no choice but to take on a light jog every few seconds, I started to get winded. After about 20 minutes of trying to bargain with him through the English language, which he probably couldn't comprehend since I never trained him, I eventually put both feet down and came to a full stop on the sidewalk. And when I looked up, I found myself in front of a bookstore. It was called Terry's Books, a near-ancient shop run by an 82-year-old man with a passion for reading ink on pieces of chopped-up trees. Realizing how hard I was panting and how I always wanted to check out the inside, this seemed like my perfect excuse to go in. I walked through the door and was greeted with a ringing bell and a hearty, "Welcome to Terry's Books," from the owner himself. The bookstore was about the size of a 500 square foot apartment, but felt like it was the size of a tent with the amount of books that were stashed in every single crevice of the place. The smell of old paper hit my nostrils soon after, and the calming sounds of an old 1920s jazz record played through my ears. "Let me know if you need help with anything," Terry said, and left me to my own devices to explore the bookstore. Each shelf spanned what seemed to be 15 feet high, and every book, while not in the most pristine edition, was placed in alphabetical order, perfectly aligned with each neighboring book. I felt a sense of peace that was usually hard to find when I left the controlled environment of my apartment. Terry must have mistaken my small pocket of peace for confusion, because after 10 minutes of wandering, he asked me, "Is there anything you're looking for in particular?" No, I don't think so," I said. "I just always pass by this store when I walk my dog, and I wanted to check it out." "It's pretty magical, isn't it?" said the old man. "I spent over 50 years curating the selection here and making it feel like you're traveling through time around every corner." I looked at him behind the front counter and grinned, saying, "That's almost what I instantly felt. It's not often that I get any peace of mind, given this dog and my unmanageable constant fear and anxiety." I quickly looked down, realizing I might have revealed too much. But Terry laughed, like a friend that had been to hell and back with you, and replied, "You remind me quite a bit of my old self." Let me ask you this. Do you often fear the worst case scenario, make decisions based on that fear, and try to control everything that enters your life? Looking back up, I stared at the old man straight in his eyes. Yes, all the goddamn time. It's like no matter how hard I try, I can never get my life to play out the way I want it to. And there's so much that I feel like isn't in my control that scares the shit out of me when I think about all the possibilities that can come from it. Terry continued looking me in the eyes, while I feared I may have come off too strong. Without responding to my confession, he came out from behind the counter and went up the stairs that led to the back of the bookstore. Upon returning, he was holding a small book that had an ancient Greek statue covering the majority of the front of it. Back when I was around 23 or so, a friend of mine gifted me this book for my birthday. He said to me, this book was written by a Roman emperor, and it wasn't actually meant to be a book at all. It was his personal journal. If this can't get you to stop worrying, I'm not sure anything will. I hope it helps you find some solace. Well, I ended up reading the entire thing the night that I got it, and the words of that emperor from 2,000 years ago completely captivated me and felt just as relevant to my life as it must have felt to his way back then. Give it a read and see if it can do the same for you. I examined its cover, which read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and said, okay, I guess I'll give it a shot. How much do I owe you? That one's not for sale, he replied. It's my own copy, and you can have it. Although skeptical as to why this random old dude would give away a book that seemed to have such a profound impact on his life, I didn't bother questioning the fact that I didn't have to spend any money. So I thanked him, told him I would be back soon, and left the store. I found a bench at the small park about 10 minutes away from the bookstore, and decided I would at the very least read the first couple pages. Robert had tired himself out by this point, so it was easy to tie him to one of the arms of the bench and get him to lay down. As I flipped through the first few pages, I found myself tuning out all of the outside world and getting sucked into the Roman emperor's words. The central idea regarding Stoicism revolves around what you can and can't control. Fitting, I know. As far as the Stoics were concerned, the only thing you needed to differentiate was what is and isn't under your control, and the only thing you needed to focus on was the former. As Marcus put it, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Wow, thanks Marcus, what a profound thought that is. But if I wanted to be able to completely control how I react to a thought, scenario, or future event, don't you think I would have done that already? All this book showed me after the first 10 pages was what I already knew. If you can't control what happens to you, control how you react to it. Well, I can logically conclude that I should not worry about many things, but my emotions will still bring me to worry about many things. It's almost like that insufferable trendy saying, happiness is a choice. If happiness really was a choice, don't you think I'd always choose to be happy? Regardless of my annoyance, I carried on reading, holding on to the glimmer of hope that was created by the old man's reverence for the book. The next piece of advice that stuck out to me was Marcus's take on change. He wrote, "Is any man afraid of change? What can take place without change? What then is more pleasing or more suitable to the universal nature? And canst thou take a bath unless the wood undergoes a change? And canst thou be nourished unless the food undergoes a change? And can anything else that is useful be accomplished without change?" This excerpt, unlike my first impressions of the book, actually felt quite beneficial to me. The world is in a constant flux, with all of its usefulness coming from said flux. The changing of elements, the growth of businesses and companies, and my uncontrollable feelings to unfortunate events all come from this existential fact. And to resist or be afraid of change is like being afraid of progress. Realizing this made a small sense of ease take over me. But then I quickly remembered. I am, in fact, somewhat afraid of progress for that exact reason. Progress brings change, and change is oftentimes unpredictable. At the very least, if I stay in the same place, I can control some variables because those variables are familiar and constant. But yet again, I pushed through my intuitive response to put down the book and went on reading each page, hoping to find the cure to my insufferable mindset. And when I had finished the final word from that 2,000-year journal and put the book down on the bench, I didn't feel any different. No aha moment, no sudden realization, and no gained intelligence. Did the effect of the book have a delay on it, like a pill that had to be broken down by your stomach acid before it produced the desired effects? Or was I truly that unfixable? As I looked down at the ground, comparing myself to the calm and composed nature of Terry after he finished the book, my sadness for my current state rose drastically. But just as I was lamenting in my sadness, Robert's head shot up. A mouse had scurried by his peripheral view, and his instincts got the better of him. He stood on his forelegs, barked once, and broke free from the knot I tied, sprinting heavily towards the small rodent. For a split second, my heart felt like it had stopped completely. Realizing the situation I might be in, I panicked and got up to run after him. How did he manage to get out of that knot? I was sure I tied it as tight as I could squeeze it. What's gonna happen if I can't catch up to him? What if he runs into the street on accident and gets hit by a car? Then I really would be a dog murderer. I chased him down for all of 10 minutes, and my beating heart paired with my overbearing anxiety finally became too much to handle. I stopped, bent over, and winced as I held my stomach in agony. Robert was no longer anywhere to be found. It was like I was living in a nightmare. I slowly made my way back to the bench and forcefully sat down with a large thud. While throwing that useless book to the ground, I screamed, "How would you handle this, huh, Marcus? Emperor piece of shit." My frustration soon turned to hopelessness and despair, and I thought about how I could possibly explain the loss of my dog to my friends. Nothing, from my feelings and thoughts, to my friends' reactions when they heard the news, to my dog's fate, was in my control, and I felt myself creeping ever closer to the edge of insanity. But just before I was about to reach that edge, a barking in the distance pulled me back. The barking grew louder and louder until finally I saw Robert's short brown hair and pointed ears come out of a bush and into my field of view. Robert, without any sort of training or serious long-term relationship with me, had come back. I felt relieved but completely perplexed at the same time, and above all, I felt different. By dancing on the edge of complete destruction of my psyche due to this unpredictable series of events, I felt as though I had massaged a new part of my brain that had been severely sprained long ago. It was true what Marcus Aurelius had said about change. With every new moment, our body moves our cells around to keep us healthy and alive. And much of that is not in our control. How other people perceive you and think about you or talk about you, no matter how hard you try to keep a good appearance and appeal to them, is not in our control either. And what my dog decided to do with his freedom from the leash was completely out of my control as well. But my fault in thinking for the solution to my anxiety for those things, that Mr. Aurelius didn't seem to understand, was in the search for what I thought was in my control. While Marcus saw the change that happens in this universe as having a sort of accordance, I prefer to see it as total chaos. I don't try to discern between finding what is and is not in my control and choosing to focus on the former, because I don't see anything as being in my control. And as a result, paradoxically, I have more control over myself than ever. As much as I desperately try to secure some certainty in my future, or act like everything is going to turn out alright in the end, I'll never really know for certain. Sure, we can test and play around with the different elements of this universe, and through that testing, we can observe patterns that can help us make future predictions. But even if we find the chances of something happening are 99.9%, there's still that 0.1% chance that it all goes wrong. And it is only considered to be something that is wrong if you had made a prediction or assumption before it happened. So I decided to get rid of just about all of those. What I realized is that life is just like my dreams. In life, the only reason everything seems like it's under more control and more real than a dream is because we will wake up one day and see the sun shining when it's morning and see it set when the moon rises. And that pattern will repeat itself without fail. Out of this pattern, we start to build expectations. Expectations of how people should and will act, expectations of how a decision will turn out, and expectations of ourselves based on the patterns of our previous actions, just like the patterns of the rising and setting of the sun. But setting an expectation, especially on something which you're not looking forward to, is the same thing as saying, I've seen this pattern before, and if I don't see this pattern again, I will let it negatively dictate the way I act and feel. Can you imagine if we had the same sort of attitude towards our dreams? That would be incredibly foolish. And yet we do this with life, which is really just a dream of easily identifiable patterns based on past experiences. The more that you try to control what happens to you, or control what is in your power, the less you actually control it. By trying to establish a sense of control, you are indicating that you are trying to separate yourself from the rest of what is going on around you. In other words, you are trying to make a controller who governs against the uncontrollable. But who is the one that is controlling the controller? If you continue to ponder that question and find an answer to it, you'll realize that there was never any controller to begin with. Just like peeling back an onion's outer layer only reveals more onion, trying to find some control that's separate from the uncontrollable will only reveal to you more things that aren't under your control. And that will make you go insane, just like it made me. You see, my insanity didn't come from trying to find the sanctuary from the uncontrollable, it came from thinking there was ever a sanctuary to begin with. The reality is, you are no different from anything outside of you that you consider to be not under your control. There is no separation. And trying to control your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and future is like trying to control those things outside of you, like an untrained dog without its leash. You don't know what it's gonna do next, but maybe, just maybe, it'll return back to you, as long as you stop trying to get it to. So maybe in our time here, especially when we are worrying or filled with anxiety, we can stop trying to search for the unanswerable question of what is in my control and how can I gain more control over it? And instead, just accept and sit with the fact that there was never an answer to that question to begin with. And by letting the uncontrollable happen naturally, sitting with it and observing it without attaching some sort of illusory external influence on it, we can find that calm in the chaos without effort. These days, I've scaled back on the frequency with which I adopt this mindset. While it has helped me almost completely alleviate my anxiety and fears, I know I have to use this body I occupy to control certain elements in my life in order to get what I want, with me voluntarily controlling Robert's food intake so he lives another day serving as a great example of this. But when I start to feel those sensations that used to define my identity and my life come up to the surface once again, I always make sure to let the uncontrollable be uncontrollable. On that morning of my dramatic change, I dreamt I was floating in a block of ice while buildings changed colors and scale, and the woman that accompanied me watched as I slowly drift closer and closer to the abyss. But the truth is, I never left that dream. I still haven't.